Are you constantly being taken by surprise by your students' results? Are test scores like a box of chocolates or the lottery, and you have no idea what they're going to get, what to expect from your students on every test? Well, you just need to work on learning how to collect and track data. Watch the rest of this video to find out why that's so important. Okay, this is part 2 in the series on how to build rigor in your high-risk classroom. And part 2 has to do with data. Why is it important to take data? Why is it important to track data? Do we really need it? Okay, it's very important. The first tip about taking data is that you need to explicitly teach how to view the data. If you just throw data in front of somebody, in front of a lot of people, and suppose they're doing badly, which a lot of our kids, their data doesn't look so good, and a lot of our teachers, they're just gonna go home feeling bad, feeling rejected, feeling like a loser. A lot of times they will do that. You have to teach the right mindset. Data is just that, it's just data, okay? And it's good or bad comparatively, right? To see how far we've come or how far we have to go. So it's not something that's going to label you. That's not your place. That's not who you are, but it's just a tool. So we have to make sure we're teaching students the right mindset. The data is used to teach perseverance and progress. And the students need to use it, in conjunction with a growth mindset, that we're tracking it to see if we're moving in the right direction or not. And if we're not, that's just our data to show us we need to change something, right? And if we are, then that is data that's going to be an encouragement to them. It's going to build their sense of confidence in being able to reach their goal. So overall, that first tip is about understanding the purpose of data. It's not to label them, you're not stuck on that data point, it's just to use it to guide our next steps. Okay, the next tip is about data tracking. It's often called DDI, data-driven instruction, when you use the data to inform your instruction. Okay, you always want to start with a baseline data. Sometimes it's the summative assessment from the prior year, or it's a test like MAP growth, a test that's going to be a really big overall test of their skills. It's not like an individual unit assessment that you're starting with normally. Okay, so you're going to have that baseline data, and then you have to mark out points where you're going to be incrementally tracking their progress. It could be weekly, it might be every few weeks, however you decide to do it. But I will say the more frequent is better. I will do it daily, especially when you're coming up on that major assessment. You want to see how the kids are doing on every little thing you're teaching, depending on your time and your energy and how good of a system you have for doing that. Is it auto-graded or is it a writing piece? You've got a certain amount of time. And you need to make sure whatever these milestones are that you're tracking, they need to be similar in rigor and style to your summative assessment. Okay, so you can't be giving them oral assessments and teacher observations, and then their summative assessment is going to be written multiple choice questions. You can do both of those things, but you have to make sure that it's in a like style. If they're going to have multiple choice questions on their summative, then you better be mixing in multiple choice questions somewhere, or multiple response. However that's going to look, you want to mix that in. You want to choose formative assessments or create them that even use the language of the summative assessment. It's not cheating to use the stems, that they're going to be using. You don't have to just write them either. I will use them in speaking. Inference questions, the reader can tell that blah, blah, blah. That's how our state test not always, but often will frame or phrase an inference question. Well, then that means when I'm speaking, I'm going to say things like the reader can tell, or the reader knows that, or the reader can infer. Whatever language that test is using, pull that into your daily instruction. This is super important for high-risk learners, because if you're not a high-risk learner, you might be able to understand that means the same thing. But we talked about the explicit nature of teaching that's necessary to reach the high-risk learner. You might say the same thing in other words, paraphrasing, but they're not making that connection. Or from one language to the other. I could say something in Spanish and say a word in English that sounds very similar, but until you point out that connection, they might not even guess what that word means, even though it's almost the same. And when you point it out, they're like, oh yeah, and then now you've given them another tool for mastery. So use the language of the test, use the style of the test, and the rigor of the test. Not only that, that's not how you're teaching it. You're going to teach it with group activities and hands-on things. You're not just teaching to the test. You're not using copies of that test for your daily instruction, but you can, your intermittent milestones, they should look pretty similar to that summative assessment, because that's what they're going to be seeing. Okay, and then they're going to feel very comfortable when it's time to take that summative assessment, because it looks just like what things that they've been doing all year long. Also, when you're giving those milestone assessments, you want to be sure and give your students the same kind of accommodations they're going to get on the summative assessment. If they're going to have questions read aloud to them on the summative, make sure they experience that regularly. It doesn't have to be every one of them, but regularly throughout the year, so they know. Because it's so they know, so they can prepare, and also so you'll get some valid results. Results should never be a surprise to you. When it comes time for the state assessment, when I'm teaching, we're never surprised by the results. We pretty much know how every kid's gonna do. There's always somebody who does a little better, a little worse than we thought, or somebody had a bad day, or somebody really focused that day and they did better, but it's really not that far off the mark, because we are tracking data so much. We know which kids are consistently scoring at the advanced level. We know which kids we're kind of worried about, and we know which kids they have their data trackers. They know how they do, and they've been doing work that's similar and comparable to that summative. So why should we be surprised? There aren't any surprises if you're tracking the data and you know where the kids are, and the kids know where they are, and they know what it takes. The third tip that I have, or piece of advice for data, is about accountability and transparency. So you don't want to break any FERPA laws and tell the whole class what the kids made. You're not supposed to be doing that. But it is okay to show like a graph of how everybody did, and that student will know where they are in that graph. Without you pointing out their name, they know where their number is. It's a very good idea to show the students where they fall in the whole scheme of things. Now, if you have kids that are receiving special education, special services, and it's not going to do them a lot of good to see where they are in that scheme because they're really working at their best, you might want to focus them on their growth, right? But I've had a lot of kids who they think they're doing great or they're doing mediocre, but they could do a lot better. And sometimes just showing them where they fell, look, this is how the class did and you're over here, don't use that as a weapon. But they're like, oh, okay. And then they go, they've got the little competitive streak in there because they knew they could do better than that. But seeing how they fell in that grand scheme of things. You can also do it with different classes. You can show your first section average versus your second and your third section averages, just so that they know it is important. It does matter, because the accountability of the school is not a secret. It's posted on the internet for everyone to see, right? It's transparent. It's not a secret, and it does have a large effect. How each student does, it affects your school, it affects you, it affects your state, and it affects the whole country, when they start analyzing country compared to country. So that's not a secret. The only thing is you don't want to reveal the personal, scores of that student in front of it's not anybody's business. You can't reveal that. But you can make sure that student knows where they fall, okay? And you can tell the class how everybody fell in that kind of transparency, that kind of accountability really helps people understand where they are and where they need to be. It's also important because at low-performing schools, sometimes you feel good about yourself if your scores are just a little better than your neighbor teacher, right? But maybe you're both super low. Maybe all of the kids are super low and you feel good because your kids averaged at a 50 and their kids averaged at a 40, and that's probably true. You're probably a strong teacher, but when you look at the neighbor school, they're all up at an 80. Why is that? So that kind of information really changes your outlook to see how it plays out in the larger scheme of things, and what is the possibility. We're not just comparing ourselves in this smaller circle. We've got to look at the larger circle and what are kids really capable of. All you have to do sometimes is show the kids the data, and they will make their own conclusions. You don't have to tell them, oh, we need to really work harder, or you guys are lower than the other class, or something. They will understand on their own, and they will try. I did it one time. I was coaching a teacher, and I think she only had two sections, and one section was just super low. I don't know if they played around. They had a lot of behavior issues in there, but they were just as smart and capable as the other class. And but the other class was more focused, just the mix. And so right before a test, I remember I showed that first class the scores, the two, and their bar was really short, and the other class was bigger. Actually, I showed them. I think I showed them 4 classes because we had 4 classes in the grade. But I remember some kid in the back of the room who's usually playing around, whatever. He's like, "We're the lowest class!" And he just screamed it out, and they immediately took the test. And they immediately scored higher than the other classes. It was kind of crazy. I did not expect that to happen, but it showed that just that little motivation that they could do better than they've been doing. They just were not trying as hard, or was not as important to them. Okay, just that little piece made them actually outscore the other classes, and they hadn't learned anything new between when I showed them that data and when they got a higher score. It was just seeing the data. So they need to see the data. The 3 points are explicitly teaching them how to view the data, tracking the data, using that data to drive instruction, and having the kids track their own data. And finally, being transparent about like class data and school data, showing how overall everybody is doing. Okay, those are 3 components of data that will help raise the level of rigor in your classroom and help move you towards that goal of high expectations that you've set up from the beginning. Now be sure to watch part 3, which has to do with effective teaching strategies, because you'll have the goal, and now you have the milestones and the tracking. Now what are you going to do to make sure the students learn it? Watch part 3.